Hello and welcome to another episode of the Your AKT Podcast, which is hosted by WellMedic.co.uk. In our last podcast, we covered an example of a routine blood test. And in this example, we're going to carry on a very similar level with very subtle blood result findings. Now, in this scenario, you have a 73-year-old gentleman who's recently presented after having routine bloods taken for his yearly diabetic monitoring. Now, the blood results show a HB of 145, white cells of 9, platelets of 540, a HbA1c of 52, a normal renal and liver profile. Which primary malignancy could explain the patient's blood results? So I know this is a complicated scenario. Feel free to have a listen again to the scenario and then just pause it and have a think about what could be going on here. So now that you've had time to think about what might be going on, I'd like to introduce the topic of thrombocytosis. Now, thrombocytosis is actually one of my very favorite topics at the moment, and it's one of those examples where I've come across a really interesting case for a patient who had thrombocytosis, and I'm now acutely aware of everyone with thrombocytosis. I often think of platelets in a very similar way to how I think about ferritin. It's an acute phase reactant, which means that it's going to respond to infection, it's going to respond to inflammation, it's going to respond to bleeding, and then ultimately respond to malignancies as well. Now, in order to answer this question, I would like to break down a really interesting study which was taken from the British Journal of GP, which was published in 2017. And I would highly recommend that you have a read of this, especially if you're interested in the full results. But there's another hidden example here as well. This is a very, very good example of a prospective cohort study which can help you prepare for your evidence-based medicine section. Now, if you've used my evidence-based medicine course, you will know how important study design is, and we have helped trainees yield over 85% plus in the statistics section, which can be a massive, massive help to your passing your AKT. So ultimately, what's happened in this scenario is you've got two groups. Patients are either isolated into one group where you've got high platelets, or into another group where you've got normal platelets, and then you're followed up for 1 year, and then at 1 year's time, the incidence of cancer is then recorded. Now, the most startling results from this study were taken from the male arm of this study, where 11.6% of male patients developed cancer in the thrombocytosis arm, whereas 4.1% of male patients developed cancer in the normal platelet group. And there was also a 4% rise in the female groups as well. So you were more likely to have cancer if you were in the thrombocytosis arm. Now, what I wanted to do really in this podcast episode was to just break down two of the most common cancers which were detected in the study. Now, in both groups, it was either lung cancer or colorectal cancer, but there was two other notable cancers as well. There was a presence of breast cancer in the female arm and prostate cancer in the male arm. So in summary, with this male patient that we have, we should consider lung cancer, we should consider colorectal cancer, but we should also consider prostate cancer as well. Now, for me, this is really, really important, so please do check out the study. And in the next podcast, we're going to move on and talk about some of the non-malignant causes of thrombocytosis. I really hope you've enjoyed this, and please do share this with your GP trainee colleagues. This podcast is hosted by wellmedic.co.uk. We help GP trainees pass the AKT.